It's the Cryptocurrently Podcast, special Sunday edition for Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for hitting like, hitting subscribe, hitting share, retweeting, all that stuff, leaving a comment on iTunes if that's how you're tuning in. I want to get to a couple of quick things. Listen, if you're currently holding cryptocurrencies, you might not want to have a look at how they're looking right now. Market's down pretty bad. But on a lighter note, hey man, it's Father's Day, and fathers are important, right? We are seeing the result of what, I don't know, 50, 60 years of just playing loosey-goosey with divorce court, and everybody gets a divorce. Oh, you don't like being married anymore? Here's a divorce, all right? Well, now we see the importance of fathers, right? Because we have a bunch of people who are walking around who have no idea who they are, or the long-term effect, even longer-term effect is they don't even know what they are. That's what happens when you don't have a father. But I have a special Father's Day story here for you, and this one involves the President of the United States. Now listen, I never liked Donald Trump, never in my life, up until just recently. Probably just like most of you, right? When I was a kid, we lived way up in the mountains in San Diego, right? On a place called Carve-Acre Road. If you want to go onto Google Maps and pull up Carve-Acre Road, you will see that that land is still almost exactly how it was, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There's really not much out there. There's a few homes, but it's wide open land, and we had horses and pigs and chickens. We were mountain people, right? And being born in Southern California in 1973 to a Christian Protestant home, right? We didn't like city people. We certainly didn't like the Russians, right? Because the Cold War was going on, and Catholics, right? Those were the big things that we didn't like: rich people, Russians, and Catholics. And as I grew older and was certainly a child of the 80s, that's where that's the decade that I became self-aware and started getting my own taste for music and, realizing that there's a whole another world going on outside. Donald J. Trump was always on the news, right? He was this fast-talking, good-looking New York guy, right? He was everything that me and my people kind of despised about the human condition. It was like, he's rich, he's a wheeler dealer, man, he's from the big city, right? Like he was one of those people. And furthermore, he was a Democrat, right? You remember that, right? And all those pictures of him hanging out with perennial race baiters, guys like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Like, he was giving money to those people, giving money to the Clintons, later on in the 90s and in the early 2000s. That's who he hung with. So he was a rich New York Democrat who gave out money and hung out with people that were, in our opinion, unsavory people, right? People that were making the United States a worse off place, right? But there wasn't like a real hatred of him. It was just like he was just one of those people. He was like an iconic figure of everything that we should strive not to be in life, right? And all of his divorces and his very public divorces and all that sort of thing. So just going through life, I never liked Donald J. Trump. Didn't like him. Didn't like who he was. Didn't like what he represented. Didn't like what he stood for. Right? But most people celebrated him because he was, again, kind of a figurehead of the American dream. Work hard, do business, get good at what you can, and you can have as much as you want. Right? That's how most people saw him. So I went about my life, and later on I became a commodities trader and a futures and options broker in the commodities market. So I learned a thing or two about the markets and the world around me, and how that whole world works. And I believe it was around 2003, HBO produced a documentary. It was called Born Rich. I don't know if you saw it. If you did not, I recommend. I think you can find it on YouTube or whatever. You can probably get it for free somewhere. It was a really interesting documentary. It was a documentary about all of the children of the super wealthy, heirs to like the Pfizer fortune and the Johnson and Johnson fortune. These huge companies, Bayer and like these name brands that we have them in our home. We just forget that there was actually a Mr. Johnson at some point, right? And there was a Mr. Pfizer or whatever. You know what I mean? There was actual people that started those companies, and yet, in our homes, it's just like, oh, it's just a corporation. Well, those were people, and they had children, and these children were the subject matter of this documentary. And it was really, it was a horrifying documentary to watch. It was like if you ever watched Blackfish or The Cove, right? Did you see those documentaries? Like, if you ever saw those, it's like, wow, this is horrifying. I had no idea. Like, I don't really care about PETA, and I don't really think much about animals, but good Lord, that's wrong, Well, that's what watching Born Rich was like to me, because it wasn't dolphins getting, clubbed and chopped up in a bay. It was human beings that were completely worthless. Like just absolute tragic conditions of humanity, right? These were children who never were made to struggle for anything. They never learned how to work and figure out problems for themselves, right? They were like wastes of flesh. It was truly like, and I'm not saying that to be like a jerk to those kids. It's like it was profound to watch these kids that were, and when I say kids, like as they were being interviewed, they were in their early 20s, maybe even late teens, but these kids were just awful, and they were on a lot of drugs, right? A lot of prescription drugs and other kinds of drugs, and they were just the nonsense that would come out of their mouths. It was like, good God, it was like watching a freak show. There wasn't anything funny about it. There wasn't anything that you could look at and say, well, like, oh, they deserve that. It's like, no human deserves to become a train wreck like that. Truly awful. So believe me when I tell you, like, if you have not seen that documentary, I strongly recommend it, because it's a cautionary tale of like why you must give your children discipline, right? Why it is that like if you're well off, it's like why it is that you actually can't just give your children full access, and you can't give them money in exchange for your responsibility to parent them. You know what I mean? Like those kids need it. And if you don't do that, like if you don't rein your children in, right? If you don't give them what every doctor in that particular field of like child rearing will tell you, like they desire discipline, and if you don't give it to them, they're gonna be a complete waste of flesh, or as we used to call it in the Marine Corps, waffle, waste of flesh, WAF, waffle. That's who these kids were. It was heartbreaking. 2003 is when that came out. So Born Rich is the name of it. And towards the very end of this documentary, there was one of the last interviews, or the following around as they did of all of these different. There was like 10 or 15 different rich kids that they were highlight. They were highlighting like Paris Hilton and all the Hilton kids and but one of the last people that they had on there was the daughter of one Donald J. Trump. And she was sitting there with her, her groomed appearance, and she was sitting very politely, and she was talking in a way that everybody could understand. She was like the only person who wasn't talking like they were drugged out of their gourd. She was lucid. She was coherent. It was the only one. She was the only one in that documentary where it was like, oh, this is like a normal person. This is just like a kid that's talking like an intelligent human being. And she told this story and it blew me away. She said, because she was referring to a particular time, which you may remember. It was the late 80s, like 1989, or maybe it was even 1990 or 91. But you might remember back in those days, Donald Trump was once again in the newspapers, only this time he was filing for bankruptcy for $4 billion, I believe it was. $4 billion, right? Just to conceptualize that, because we hear these numbers on TV a lot now, and Obama sent whatever billion dollars to Iran, and the nation is $20 trillion in debt, and like we start losing the significance of that. But just to keep to put it in perspective, to spend $1 billion, it's something like you'd have to spend something like 25,000, it's like, I forget what the statistic was, but it's like you'd have to spend like $250,000 a day for every single day for like 72 years or something like that. It's like $1 billion is a lot of money. It's a lot of dollars. And Donald J. Trump was in debt by 4 of those, right? A lot of money he owed. And so Ivanka, right? Is that her name? Young Trump's daughter, was telling this story of, one day they were driving to Trump Tower, as they did often, and they, Dad gets out of the car and opens the door up for his young daughter, who at the time was probably 6 years old or 8 years old, and they were walking into Trump Tower. And as she's sitting there with the director or whoever's interviewing her for that documentary, as she's sitting there, she's telling this story very calmly and very articulately. And she says, they're walking into Trump Tower, and they see a homeless man sitting there against Donald Trump's building. A building that he built, that he owned. And there's a homeless guy sitting there, and she says, my dad turned to me and said, you see, honey, you see that man right there? That man has $4 billion more than I do. That's good parenting. That's perspective, right? You owe $4 billion. The man who has $0 has $4 billion more dollars than you do. Do you understand that? Do you get the concept there? That's good parenting. And from that moment, it was that moment where I realized that, perhaps, the mistakes that Donald Trump has made in his life, or the company that he kept, or, his political ideologies, that, perhaps I could separate those things and remove those from the fact that, he's a good father. And he was a wise father to his children. And maybe I should just focus on the good instead of, walking through life thinking that this man epitomized all the bad things in life. Because that's how I was raised, and that's how my parents raised me, and whatever. And maybe, just maybe, that the love that this man had for his daughter and his sons, and, maybe that's more important than the differences that we had at the time in political ideologies. So I wanted to share that story, and I've been wanting to share that story for some time now. And as of today is Father's Day, and I am a new father. This today is my first ever Father's Day where I get to celebrate it as a father. I have a young son, and I have another son on the way. And I'm a father now, and I realize how important it is to train up your children well. And I hope that I'm able to do that in my own life. And I appreciate that the President of the United States, our President, Donald J. Trump, has raised good kids and sent them off into the world. I hope you have a good Father's Day today, and try to keep in mind that your position as a father is crucial. It just as as we celebrate Mother's Day, they're crucial, right? And both are needed. And we need to once again embrace this art of parenting. of fathering and husbandry. That is my wish today. So God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you, if you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you hit like and share and hit the bell icon. It helps me out. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on the regular podcast. See you then.